approaching to make a class for this, they kind of gave me something to run with, which is like a family tradition, a dish you commonly make or eat. And, you know, a Utah native, I must have eaten funeral potatoes dozens of times. But truth be told, I've never actually made them myself before deciding I was going to do it for this recipe. So I'm going into it with a clean slate. It's been fun to figure out different ways to do it. But little intro to me, I'm Alex, like I said, Utah native. I just like food a lot as a hobby. It's nothing professional, but food is my love language. It's how I share that I care about people. It's how it's fun. It's fun to learn about. There's hundreds of ingredients and thousands of recipes, and I, especially in recent years, have come to love sharing it. And you don't have to be an expert or a world-class chef in order to be a good cook at home, or even to share your cooking. Like anything you've learned about cooking, you can share with a bunch of people, and I really like doing that. Is it good for me to ask for introductions from people attending so I can get their names maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, tell me your name and one of your favorite food dishes to cook. Let's see, I see Shelly. Let's start with Shelly.
Okay, I'm supposed to say my name, Shelly. One of my favorite food dishes to cook, anything with a sauce. I mean, from like linguine and clams to pesto. I love to cook. It's my hobby as well.
Nice. And
for a note, sorry, I've never even heard of funeral potatoes. I just moved here and I figured it's a Utah thing.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, Dylan?
Yeah, my name is Dylan. And I would say my favorite thing to cook, I like slow cooking things when I have the opportunity. Corned beef and cabbage is actually one of my favorite things to cook. Just usually do it only once or twice a year, but I always enjoy it.
Nice. And we got Bentley.
My name's Bentley. I actually work for an outfitter a couple weeks a year and enjoy cooking in my spare time as well. For the outfitter, I'm a camp cook though. So when I saw healthy funeral potatoes, that sounded interesting to me because the key to cooking in a camp like that is bacon grease and cheddar cheese. Mm-hmm. So I thought this might be a fun way to learn how to do it a little bit better.
Yeah. Great. So funeral potatoes, like for those who don't know, it's basically potatoes and sour cream and cheese is basically what it is, just all smothered together. It's this big, fatty, starchy thing, and it's fantastic. You basically mix frozen hash browns with some cream and cheese, put it in a casserole and bake it. So it's a classic, simple Utah casserole. But when I was looking at the recipe, I really wanted to find ways to make it, well, healthier is one thing, but honestly, I just wanted to make it better. I just wanted to make it better tasting, more interesting flavors, less heavy on the fat and all the cream on it. So I was going to share a screen. Let's see, because I had, maybe I'll bring it up here and I'll walk through and talk through it. There should be a link to this along with the class where you can see what I've done here. But I made a spreadsheet comparing a before and after of the original recipe that I found for some funeral potatoes and comparing the ingredients to each other, what I've substituted for each other. There's calculations of how many calories, how much fat and protein and carbs are in it. And so what I've got here is the potatoes are pretty much the same, about 2 pounds of potatoes to start with. And actually, I can switch overhead camera and show you the ingredients here. So 2 pounds of potatoes, pretty typical. The main difference I'm doing is I'm doing some whole raw potatoes. The recipe typically calls for frozen ones. You can use really any potatoes you want. I've got a gold potato in here. I've got a kind of funky Asian purple skin potato here, sweet potato kind of thing. So you can do a mix of really whatever you want, especially if you leave the skin on. That'll make it a little healthier there. Probably the biggest substitution I'm making in this recipe is instead of what's typically 2 whole cups of sour cream, I'm subbing a lot of that for some Greek yogurt. Goat yogurt would actually be fantastic too, but for this, you'll specifically want a Greek yogurt, which is strained and thicker, and we'll talk about why in a moment. But that was a big substitution. Another one we're doing is olive oil instead of butter. Obviously, from a health standpoint, you stand to get a lot of nutrition from olive oil. All the good fats, not as much saturated fat, lots of the good fats in comparison to butter. I also decided to cut the cheese, so to speak. Cut the cheese in half. It would typically be about 2 cups of cheese. I'm going to obviously from a health standpoint, just 1 cup of this cheese, and that's about 4 ounces if you're looking for weight. And I even did a price comparison of the before and after of the original recipe versus these healthier and more flavorful alternatives. And it prices out to just about the same. So it's not any more expensive. This is one of those cases where eating healthier is just about the same as the less healthy version. So the first step is going to be shredding the potatoes. You could do this in a cheese grater if you wanted. That could work pretty well too. But I like using a mandolin like this. These are actually pretty common. If you don't have one, you can find them at thrift stores. That's actually where I found this one that I've had for probably 5 or 6 years now. It's been really good. So if you can find them cheap that way, that's a really good idea. And I'm doing about 1/8 of an inch sticks, I guess. I don't know the technical French term for this. It's probably matchstick or something like that. But 1/8 of an inch. And I suppose the exact size of this dice doesn't matter too much. If you wanted, you could do chunks of potatoes or slices of potatoes or larger chunks. It just might take longer to do the initial boiling. I've got a cut-proof glove here, which I really like using with these. It gives you a little more tactile feeling versus one of those big things that clomps onto it that they usually come with. It's also nice. You can just use a fork, which is kind of a fun thing to do. These sweet potatoes tend to have a thicker skin, a little tougher to cut through, but this is definitely one where I find the mandolins a little bit easier to use versus a cheese grater. Now this is a perfect dish to make for tonight because like early September, I figured it would be warm outside and maybe it wouldn't be the best to make a dish that's a hot casserole thing, but somehow we got blessed with huge winds and a cold front yesterday, so.
Blessed is open to interpretation, Walton.
Yeah,
Those
and
mandolins are really satisfying.
And this is the most, I would say it's the most labor intensive part of the recipe. So probably or at least the thing that takes the longest of manual work. So there we got about 2 pounds of potatoes there. We're going to boil these potatoes. I just have a standalone butane burner here just for the sake of demonstration, but it's perfectly fine to do this on whatever cooking surface you have. Like, I'm pretty sure there's a warning on the side of this that tells you not to do it indoors. So I guess this is a don't try it at home kind of thing. But I'm just gonna go ahead and throw those in. And gosh, one of the more useful tips for cooking something that can really up your game and make something taste good is whenever you're doing pasta or boiled potatoes or rice, always salt the water. It just makes it taste better. Italians will tell you it should be about as salty as seawater, but definitely not as salty as the Great Salt Lake. Annalise, can I quickly ask you to check on the camera? I'm just checking on the Facebook feed, or I'm just seeing a green outline on you, and I just want to make sure it's not you being visual live stream.
Yeah, let me double check on that. I'm gonna mute myself so I don't get the echo of the Facebook. Let me check.
Okay. No, I see it now. It's showing correctly. Okay, cool. So salt the water, not as salty as the Great Salt Lake. A good idea is about 1 teaspoon to 2 teaspoons of salt per quart of water. I'm boiling these potatoes in about 2 quarts of water, so I'll just put in like 4 healthy pinches. Like, I give precise measurements for the recipe, but I, especially in recent years, have come to embrace more of the cook by feel, and you don't have to measure everything exactly as much. I mean, if you want to, you can dip a finger in and taste the water and just see if it is salty enough, but the exact amount doesn't matter too much. But as a rule of thumb, about a tablespoon and a half per quart of water that you're boiling stuff in. And this will probably take about 6 to 8 minutes, depending on how thick your chunks are, if you do chunks instead of shreds. Okay, while that's going, we're going to go ahead and prep onions and garlic here. Got to check my camera. Okay. There we go, that's a better view. Okay. Cutting onions is a relatively simple thing that surprisingly there's so much attention given to it. Like, go onto YouTube and search how to chop onions or cut onions. There must be hundreds of videos. There's no one perfect way to do it. Just if you have a sharp knife and just take your time and cut it whatever way makes sense to you, like that's the right way to do it. Like, you don't have to do the verticals, then the horizontals, and then mince it up. It's perfect. It makes a lot of sense to do a radial cut kind of thing where you pull the cuts toward the root. I personally lean towards that because it's fewer cuts and it's a bit easier. And if you do it right, it actually does make more evenly sized pieces than vertical and horizontal cuts. So might not be good enough for Gordon Ramsay, but it's good enough for me. Bentley, do you do anything special with funeral potatoes when you make them?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
I'm curious if Bentley does anything special with funeral potatoes when he makes them.
No, not necessarily. I often start with frozen hash browns just for simplicity. And then the other thing that I add that I don't see here very in this recipe is just Cajun seasoning, something like a Tony Chachere's or something like that, but that's a matter of personal preference.
So I would say this recipe that I have here is really a base that you could use to expand on in whatever way you would like to. Because the thing about funeral potatoes, especially most recipes you'll find for them, there's not really much in terms of flavoring and spices. They turn out to be pretty bland, honestly. So it's pretty easy to figure out good ways to improve it with a specific flavor. Adding any sort of fresh herbs you have would be fantastic. And one thing you can do with this kind of dish, which is basically what I settled on when I developed this recipe, was I figured I wanted to steer away from the casserole version of the dish and instead make it entirely cooked in one pot. And I took inspiration from that actually from Indian curries, because there are a lot of Indian curries that are made. When I was dissecting the recipe and figuring out the healthy substitutes, when I substituted yogurt instead of cream, I was thinking about yogurt and spices and potatoes, and I'm thinking this is basically an Indian curry. So that's basically, as far as preparation goes, kind of what this recipe has morphed and evolved into. So you could definitely, if you wanted to, add some Indian spices and flavors to this dish. If you have cumin and coriander, garam masala spice mix, that would be good. Gosh, anything that goes with potatoes. Plenty of garlic, like most. I mean, right here I've got 4 cloves of garlic, and most recipes for funeral potatoes only call for 1, maybe 2 cloves. I'm loading up on this garlic because garlic goes so great with potatoes, so there's no reason to not add it for so much good flavor.
One thing I'll say is generally this is a side dish. And there was one time in a camp, we were stuck for an extra day because of snow. And so I had to make funeral potatoes as a main dish. And it was really simple to add ham steak at the end. You know, it was a ham steak that was already smoked or cured in some way, so I didn't have to worry about cooking it too much. But just doing that made it a main course in a situation we hadn't been planning on it being a main course.
Okay. I think these potatoes are just about cooked all the way through now. I've got a sink behind me with a strainer. I'm going to go ahead and drain it into there. But first, I'm going to borrow a little bit from Italian pasta traditions and throw in a little bit of this starchy water. If any of you know how to make really good Italian pastas or seen authentic recipes, you'll know that's a pretty common thing. You use all the starch that leaks out in the pasta as it cooks. We're going to do the same kind of thing here because the extra starch there is definitely going to help with the yogurt. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So we're going to mix the rest of the ingredients for the yogurt base. So I've got 2 cups of this Greek yogurt. You'll definitely want Greek yogurt for this. Whole milk is definitely generally a better idea than non-fat. Because the main thing that happens with sauces that are cooked with yogurt is that they'll tend to break. They tend to curdle a little bit, and some of the liquid and fat separates, and it just gets a little bit of oily on the surface. Generally, it's kind of unavoidable unless you're adding some sort of extra starch and binder or a gum additive of some sort. It's going to get a little bit of separation, but there are things we can do to make it less likely to get less dramatic separation. Using a whole fat yogurt is one of those things. And there's not even that much fat in whole fat yogurt anyway. I mean, by the time we've subbed out butter for olive oil, like we're still definitely in the lead. And as far as starch goes, we can add even a little bit of extra insurance for this sauce by adding some cornstarch. That'll kind of give it similar to a gravy thickening properties, where that kind of matrix of starchy goodness that keeps the sauce bound together will just make it less likely for that splitting to happen as dramatically. So about a tablespoon and a half of that. Next, adding a bit of mustard powder, about a teaspoon and a half of that. So why add this at all? Number one, it's just a good flavor that goes really well with cream and potatoes. You know, it gives it kind of a, potato salad kind of flavor to it. It also blends well with Indian kind of flavors. So if you were to spice it further like that. But the other reason I'm adding powdered mustard specifically is that liquid condiment mustard typically has a lot of vinegar in it, and acidity tends to cause yogurt-based sauces to separate. Think about, you know, if you've ever made a homemade cheese before, or see how a lot of cheeses are made. Acid is one of the things you add to it to encourage the curds to separate from the whey, and kind of encourages that breaking down of the proteins. Because it's all about the proteins in liquid. So the extra fat and starch are what will help avoid those proteins from clumping together and kind of coagulating like that. As far as fat goes, I definitely decided to keep some sour cream in the recipe because I think it just has to be there. I mean, this is a side dish. Hopefully you're not going to eat a whole plate of it by yourself, so it's not the end of the world. All things in moderation. But the main thing you'll notice about this is not a typical sour cream. This is a Mexican sour cream. This is one of those moments where I really wish you were in person with me and I could give you 1 spoonful of a typical American sour cream and then a spoonful of this stuff. The difference is incredible. This Mexican style sour cream tastes like cheese. It's got such a good, rich flavor. So if you want to find this good sour cream, luckily in Salt Lake City area, Utah, we have tons of Latin food markets. I've got one just down the block from me, which is where I get this from. And I find the best ones are the ones that, like, they come in a bag, as you saw. That's pretty common. But also the ones that are kind of orangey yellow color rather than the ones that are pure white. Those tend to be the ones that have that cheesier flavor. And that's one of the things where, you know, the flavor of this dish is going to be so much better because of it. About 2/3 of a cup of this. I'm just eyeballing this. I'm not counting calories. If you're counting calories, by all means measure and follow the spreadsheet I gave out, but about 2/3 of a cup. That looks good. Now, funeral potatoes typically call for a cream of chicken soup, canned condensed cream of chicken soup. But we can definitely upgrade that by using this stuff. This is one of the best things I always have on stock in my fridge. It's a concentrated, kind of thick, liquid, gooey chicken bouillon base. If you wanted to make this vegetarian, they make really good vegetable versions of this. But this is another one of those things where if I could have a side-by-side comparison of like powdered bouillon cubes versus this, the difference is incredible. This stuff, like bouillon cubes, taste like salt. This stuff tastes like just rich chickeny flavor. Let's see, we're doing about a tablespoon of that. Okay, and finally the cheese. Cheese is definitely somewhere where you can improve a funeral potatoes. Most recipes will call for a typical cheddar cheese, and especially the cheaper cheddar cheeses you get tend to not have that much flavor. If you can spring for a nicer cheddar, you know, they've got plenty of awesome ones at Harmon's and Smith's even. They've got really nice ones. You'll pay more for it, but the difference is really big. I'm using this is actually, let's see, this is beehive cheese, Cajun cheddar. So I think just a little bit of the spice that's on the rub of this will give just a hint of spice to this, which would be good. Yeah, if you like spicy at all, that's definitely something I would recommend putting in this recipe, because one of the best ways to make something fatty, just less thick on the tongue and a little more pleasant to eat overall, is just add a little bit of either acid or spicy also does really well. Since we're having yogurt here, we don't really want the added acid, but spicy would be really good on this. So about a cup's worth. That cheese. Oh, this is a pre-dinner snack. Okay. And just mix that all together really well. And that's good to go.
Alex, what's the consistency you're going for with this all mixed together there in that pot?
It's kind of like mayonnaise, I guess. It's a little gloopy, not really runny. It'll definitely hold if you put it on a spoon, but if you tip it over, it'll fall out. Probably doesn't matter too much. Like, it probably will vary a bit depending on the specific yogurt you're using. Different brands will be slightly different consistencies.
Thank you.
So a few minutes to talk about a subject that could easily be the subject of a whole meeting, but olive oil. If you've heard any of the hubbub about olive oil recently, you may have heard that fraud is fairly rampant. It's hard to know what you're getting in the bottle is actually genuinely high quality olive oil, especially if you're going to spend, $8, $10 a bottle for it. You do want to be getting your money's worth. So the easy answer is by this brand, this California Olive Ranch. You can generally find this at Smith's, pretty much any grocery store. Let me get my camera back on. See, I might need to plug in my camera. I will be back in 1 minute.
How's everyone's progress while we're waiting on the potatoes?
I'm coming along here, but appreciate the chance to catch up.
Awesome, cool.
Yep.
Yeah, using the mandolin makes everything go really, really fast.
There we go. Back online. Okay, back to the olive oil. So easy answer if you want good olive oil. This brand of olive oil is available at pretty much any grocery store. Walmart even carries it. One of the things, if you don't have this brand, one of the things you can look for is looking for a harvest date is a good idea. Not necessarily a best by date. It's best if you can get olive oil within a year of the harvest date. That'll give you the freshest quality because olive oil it's really more of a fruit juice than it is some sort of expelled oil. So it does tend to go bad or not go bad. If you get olive oil that's older than a year, it'll still be good. It just won't be as healthy. It won't have as much of the good stuff in it. So if you can get a harvest date within a year is good. And there are also typically certifications of some sort, like official seals that'll say like certified extra virgin. If you have the choice between getting an olive oil that's it just says extra virgin olive oil, expiration date 2 years from now versus one that's, if it at least has this kind of certification label on it, you're better off getting that one. And while olive oil fraud is an issue and has been an issue, especially in past decades, it has gotten a lot better. You're a lot less likely than you used to be to buy not good olive oil at a store. That said, I'm going to put about a tablespoon and a half into the pot here. And so funeral potatoes typically call for cornflakes to be added on the top. And when that bakes in the oven, they get a little bit crispy. In place of that, I'm going to be using breadcrumbs, especially if you can find the panko breadcrumbs. They're generally a lot more looser, crispier, crunchier, than less dense than the other kind of breadcrumbs. Those will be fantastic. But because we're doing this in the dish here and we're not putting it in the oven to still get them crispy, it's going to take like 2 big handfuls, about a cup and a half, and just mix it in that olive oil over a fairly low heat, probably a medium-low heat, until they get just lightly toasted brown. I guess as toasted as you want it to be. It's also a good idea at this point to add a little bit of salt. Some pepper too is a good idea. Yeah, and I love these just toasted, slightly oily breadcrumbs. I love these on a salad. If you ever have some really good fresh greens and you're building a salad and you want something crispy on top, maybe something that's a little healthier or smaller crumbs than croutons, these are fantastic. I love these on a salad. Okay, bottom layer is starting to get a little bit brown. Ooh, you got some pop toasting. Okay, we're actually getting pretty close here. This is where not having smell vision is a real shame, but because that toasty oil flavor is coming up off of this. You can tell it's good olive oil when it has that kind of strong smell to it. And that right there is good. So we got mostly golden brown distribution there. Put those on the side until the end. Wipe this out quickly. Okay, there's still a little bit of brown on the bottom. That's okay. Brown is flavor. Color is flavor. So we're gonna start sauteing the onions and garlic now. About 5 tablespoons of oil in there. Put the onions in first. These are just going to be sauteed until they're a little lightly brown, nice and soft. Unless you like crispy onions in your funeral potatoes, that could be okay. But I love roasted, slow roasted onions are maybe one of my favorite food flavors. Just good caramelized onions. Just, it's amazing how just onions and a little bit of butter and salt can mellow down into this rich, smooth, sweet flavor.
So that's actually something we didn't get an answer to at the beginning. What's your favorite food to cook, Alex?
Oh gosh. My favorite food.
Gotcha with your own question.
I think I've had the most fun perfecting pizza recipes, especially learning the differences between New York style crusts and recipes and sauces and authentic Italian pizza margaritas and Chicago deep dish style pizzas. I mean, they're all so distinctive. I mean, there's even styles beyond that too, but just my favorite foods generally are the ones that have some sort of combination of crusty toasted bread and melty cheese and usually a bit of salty meat. Like that trio combination, anything that brings that together in a really good way is some of my favorite food, and pizza does that really, really well.
I think that's a solid answer. I appreciate it. And as somebody that's had a chance to try one of Alex's, at least one of Alex's pizza recipes, I can say he's done a good job learning how to make Chicago deep dish, at least.
These onions are pretty close here. And I'm definitely a clean up as you go kind of cook. I get anxious when too many things start getting thrown around everywhere. It's looking pretty good. I'll go ahead and throw in the garlic. And this would be a great time if you're going to give this dish an Indian flair. This would be a great time to do what in Indian cuisine they call Tadka, or at least I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, but Tadka. And that's basically where they bloom whole spices in hot oil. Sometimes at the start of a recipe to eventually be added with all the sauce that goes into a curry, or sometimes as a finishing oil that goes for extra flavor on top. But yeah, if you toasted some whole cumin and coriander, maybe even I bet cinnamon would be interesting in this. I mean, yeah, I guess pumpkin spice. It's got to be pumpkin spice. It's pumpkin spice season. Pumpkin spice funeral potatoes.
I'll probably avoid pumpkin spice, but I've got some garam marsala blend here I might try.
That'd be good. So at this point, I'm going to add the potatoes back in. These have stayed fairly warm in the strainer, so shouldn't take long to get them back up to temperature. We're just looking to get these nice and toasty warm temperature. If you want to be all nerdy about it, get your infrared probe thermometer and see if you're getting, you know, at least 170, or you can just look at it too. That works too. Or poke a finger in it. Yeah, we're actually almost done with this recipe. The last critical step is adding the yogurt mix into it. Now, the most important thing about yogurt sauces, and really any dairy-based sauce, if you're making a cheese sauce for macaroni and cheese, if you're making an Alfredo sauce, the most important thing is to use a low heat, really as low heat as you can. High heat is what encourages all that curdling to happen. It causes the protein to separate from the liquids and the fats start pooling up on it. Like I said, we probably are going to get a little bit of separation here, but with all the cautionary steps we've taken, the extra cornstarch we've added, we should be in pretty good shape here. Okay, that's looking good to me. So,
Are all of your potatoes in that pot at this point?
yeah, that's all the potatoes.
Such a deep pot, I couldn't quite tell.
So in addition to low heat, especially when you've got a sauce like this, where it's yogurt and a bunch of things already mixed together, all you need to do is just stir it until all the ingredients are well mixed together. You got all the potatoes nice and coated and it's all pretty smooth like that. And once it's mixed together, don't mix it anymore. Just put your spatula down and literally walk away from it if you have to. Just let it sit there for about 5 minutes to slowly start warming up. Agitation is one of those other things that will encourage the mix to break. Think of it like if you were making butter. If you had some liquid cream and you started beating it, it would start curdling together and turning into butter. So that's kind of the thing we're looking to avoid here by just letting this sit over a nice low heat. And you could cover it to conserve the heat and let it do a little more evenly. It might cook a little bit faster that way and still be pretty low and moderate. So you can cover it at this point too. That's a good idea. But yeah, at this point, it's just waiting a couple minutes for this to get up to temperature. It'll probably take 5 minutes or more, depending on, because what low heat is on 10 different ovens, 10 different stoves is 10 slightly different variations. So if you peek at the top and you see it's bubbling, there's lots of bubbles happening in the middle and around the edges. If you need to take it off for a minute and then put it back on for a minute, you can do that. But yeah, a good way to tell if your heat is too high or not high enough. This is kind of what you're looking for. You can see there's just like a bubble popping up from the bottom. That's what you're looking for. If it's like a dozen bubbles popping up, heat's too high, needs to go down a little bit.
This is the part of the recipe that calls for pouring a glass of wine or beer, right?
That would be a fantastic idea. No, if this is a Mormon funeral potatoes, I suppose it would be a glass of Shasta root beer.
Martinelli's.
or maybe Martinelli's.
I have a question.
Yes.
Have you ever tried to make the version with the cornflakes on top? And if you did you like it or did you dislike it?
Yeah, so the cornflakes, I found that I was kind of conflicted on it because the top half of the cornflakes did get crispy, especially if you toss the cornflakes in a little bit of oil beforehand, like they'll get a little bit browned and toasted. That's good. But the parts of the flakes that are touching the casserole, they tend to get a little soggy, which I don't know. I think it's kind of because it does get a little bit soggy. I mean, I would personally lean towards just adding something on top at the end versus letting it get all soggy kind of thing. But I think, I suppose what a lot of funeral potato recipes do to counter that is after they put the mix in a casserole dish is they put a additional layer of shredded cheese on top. And that probably provides a little more barrier from the watery, creamy underneath it. And so that probably does help a bit if you do that. But I'm trying my darndest to make this recipe halfway healthy. So no extra layers of cheese on top. There's enough cheese and cream cheese in it as it is.
Thank you. I'm trying to be better at cooking where in the sense of like paying attention to little things kind of like that. Thinking about how it changes the consistency of your food. Same with like you covering those potatoes. Little things like that I'm trying to be more mindful of because it really affects it.
I apologize for my camera continually shutting off. I must have not put the right setting on it to keep it on, or it's out of battery.
For me, at least, it's just freeze framing. It's not going black. So it seems more like a connectivity issue than a camera issue.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's everybody's experience.
Now the camera's beeping and turning off by itself, not at my request.
Tell that camera to go to hell.
Did anyone else have any other questions?
I don't have any off the top of my head. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments about their?
It's very possible I just made funeral potatoes more complicated than they have any right to be. That's totally possible. But yeah, I can. When I was testing these recipes, I made an original recipe version and tasted it side by side with this one, and just the flavor is so much better. So I do think it's worth it to shake up the process a little bit.
Definitely. I think so too. I think with like recipes that are usually simple, making them like just a tiny bit more complex could make them just so much better.
Okay, and I think mine is actually warmed through. So we're basically just gonna pour it in a dish and put the crumbs on top, and that's it.
I have a question for you to answer while you're doing that, Walton.
Yeah.
If you were to try to replace this starch instead of a potato, what would you try to replace it with?
Yes, good point to bring up. In Indian recipes, they typically add, I don't know how to pronounce it, besan, B-E-S-A-N, which is chickpea flour. But probably not something everyone has in their own pantry at home. You could add a pre-cooked roux. I guess that would work too. Arrowroot, any of those fancy thickeners. Those would do pretty well for this.
As this was coming together, I was wondering about making grits taste like this. What do you think of that?
Sounds like a good idea. Also, if any of y'all have this, I really like this stuff for instantly thickening stuff up when I'm too lazy to make a roux with butter and flour and saute it till it gets a certain color. Like this, you can just sprinkle right on to the sauce, whisk it in, and it immediately gets thick. This could work well for that too.
Good to know.
Okay, so this is all together. Yeah, there's very little separation and breakage here. I'm pleased with this. I will admit the previous attempt I had, the last time I tried making this, I did definitely separate it by heating it too much. So this one actually did turn out better. I'm glad to see that. Let's see.
It looks so good.
Okay. There we go.
It's evident now that you did a much better job browning your breadcrumbs than I did.
If you were going to bring this to a potluck, I suppose something you would want to do that would be a really good idea would be to preheat the casserole dish. Because if it's just at room temperature and it gets all this hot stuff in it, like a lot of that heat is probably going to go to warming up the casserole. So if you were going to share this and not serve it immediately, that would be a really good idea. I've got to taste some of this. The only thing is this does turn out a little bit soupy, especially when it's still really hot. So I think if you wanted to, you could, let's see, probably not add as much of the starchy water that you add in at that point. If you wanted it to be just a little bit firmer, you definitely need a good spoon to serve this up. But yeah.
Looks great. Do you recommend leaving it, like serving it while it's still really warm, or how does it keep? Like, does it store well?
Yeah, this would keep pretty well too. I think it's best served immediately, but definitely still good the next day or day after that. Yeah, the last time I made this, I made a batch half size of this, and as I finished making it, I put it in a container, put it in the freezer, and then I like ate it the next day for breakfast. So
That sounds
it was still fine.
yum. Well, thanks so much for coming on and teaching everyone how to make this tasty dish. I'm excited to try it. So, yeah, does anyone have any final questions or thoughts before we end the call today? No? Okay, cool. Eats has, did you have something to say? Oh, okay. Sorry.
I wanted to ask.
Technology. So we have a few more of these coming up the next few weeks. If you're interested in signing up for one, you can do so on our website under our events page. And you can order an ingredient box where we will provide all the ingredients for you to make this meal. And then you can join us on Zoom to cook like this. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. And I hope you enjoy your dinners.
This was a fun experience. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Bentley. Have a good night, everyone.
I will.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Shelley.
Bye.